Welcome to the Produce Moms Podcast, where we believe there is a produce mom in all of us. I'm Lori Taylor, founder and CEO of the Produce Moms. For 10 years, I sold fresh produce to over 300 grocery stores in the U.S. And today, my team and I are fully focused on inspiring people to eat more fruits and vegetables. This show is just one of the ways that we hope to inspire you and your family to eat more produce and live a better life. If you like what you're hearing on the podcast, join our community of almost 40,000 in all 50 states and over 30 countries by visiting theproducemoms.com/subscribe. And be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes. Thanks for being here. Enjoy today's show. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is the Produce Moms Podcast. My name is Lori Taylor, and I love hosting this show. And I really love that through our podcast platform, we have provided everyone with a unique opportunity to talk about current critical events as it relates to the fresh produce supply chain. And right now, we are in, from my point of view, we're in a supply chain crisis right now. And it's not just in fresh produce. There's a lot of talk about this, and certainly our trade journals in agriculture, but even in consumer media, you're hearing about it when you turn on your nightly news. And there is a real supply chain issue right now in the United States. And we're seeing it when we shop for groceries in the form of the rising cost of goods and the inflation. So at the Produce Moms, we felt like it was prudent for us to resource through our partner network folks with, different stakeholders as it relates to the supply chain. So previously in this series, we brought you the stories of the organic bananas. And, that's America's #1 most popular organic fruit item, and the rising cost of all the goods as it relates to organic banana production has really put a crunch on these growers. And we are talking about the same type of concepts here, how different growers in a different region, because our banana growers, obviously that was in a tropical region. Now we're going to actually bring on a grower from the United States. So we're going to be talking to Ryan Atwood. He is with H&A Farms. They are out of Florida. And don't worry, I have confirmed they are Florida Gator fans in his household. But Ryan Atwood and everyone at H&A Farms, they're really known for their Florida blueberries and their grower packer. They also do a lot of stuff from the state of Georgia. And you have probably encountered their fruit through the North Bay Produce brand. So we're also bringing in Ryan Lockman. He is the Vice President of Sales and Procurement for North Bay Produce. North Bay Produce is a longstanding partner at the Produce Moms. Pre-show, I confirmed with Ryan, he is still a hockey fan. He does still cheer for the Detroit Red Wings. And he was a little annoyed, like a Red Wings fan would be, that I wondered who his favorite hockey team was, considering he's from the great state of Michigan. But hey, this is going to be a great discussion. We're bringing on two wonderful guys that have a great, unique point of view. And they're working hard every single day, kind of in the trenches of what the ag supply chain is dealing with right now. So Ryan Atwood, H&A Farms, I'd like to bring you on first to introduce yourself to our audience and say hello.
I'm Ryan Atwood. I'm one of the owners of H&A Farms. We're a blueberry grower packer located in Central Florida, just slightly above the Orlando area. We manage and own 9 farms ourselves across the state, mostly in the Central Florida region. And we pack for another 56 from Florida and Georgia.
And Ryan, how long have you guys been growing your blueberries and distributing them throughout the United States and marketing them under the North Bay brand?
We've been a North Bay co-op member for around 6 to 7 years.
Good. So let's make sure that the folks understand the role that North Bay has. Ryan Lockman, I'd like to invite you to the show. Please introduce yourself and tell people a little bit more about North Bay. We've been proud partners with North Bay Produce at the Produce Moms literally since the beginning. You guys are one of our longest standing brand partners, and we're very thankful for the support and the opportunity to work with your great brand.
Well, thanks, Lori. Again, my name is Ryan Lockman. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Procurement for North Bay Produce. based in Traverse City, Michigan. I've been with North Bay for coming up on 15 years now. Anywhere from starting off in logistics, working my way up through sales into category management, and obviously now managing all of our sales and procurement. What we do is we're basically marketers of fresh produce, with about 80% of our revenue coming from berries, with a big percentage of that coming from blueberries, and a really good percentage of that blueberry volume coming from H&A Farms. So our job is to distribute to the growers fruit, throughout the world. We currently have offices in Traverse City, Michigan, Mascouda, Illinois, Miami, Florida, London, England, and Rotterdam, Amsterdam, or the Netherlands. I mean,
wonderful.
And we also have a office in Shanghai as well.
Fantastic. Ryan, I didn't even realize that you guys had that vast of an office footprint. So thank you for dropping that knowledge on me. And you have a really unique role, because you are VP of Sales and Procurement. Talk about wearing a lot of hats in the world of the fresh produce supply chain. So what that means, folks, is Ryan is working hand in hand with their grower members, companies like H&A Farms, where Ryan and his family are growing those blueberries out of Florida. And then also VP of Sales, when you're a company like North Bay, that means you're selling your product to the grocery stores. So all these different accounts, the places where you and I are shopping, where we have seen the North Bay produce label on shelf, whether it's Kroger, Aldi, Walmart, Meyer, or someone else, those are the folks that Ryan's, he's overseeing those relationships when he's got his sales hat on. So, perfect. These are two perfect point of views as we dive into the discussions of the supply chain issues, and as well as the inflation costs. And I think, let's start on the farm. Let's start at the beginning of this supply chain. And so Ryan Atwood, we'll start with you to talk about how things have changed in your day-to-day operation, and how inflation has affected your operation at H&A Farms.
Sure. Yeah, I think, like most people probably realize that when the COVID pandemic kind of hit is the start of the change. The first change I would say is labor costs have gone up. Mm-hmm. And I think that was driven a lot, and I'm not an expert in this field, but I think that's driven somewhat into the fact that so many people decided to stay home and get out of the workforce. So in order to attract employees and talent, you had to raise your wages. And we've done that at H&A Farms. And then probably the more recent development, we typically do a fertilizer and ag chem bid for all of our growers for an annual basis. And typically when I get those bids, we lock that price in for the year. Well, this was the first year that we were told, particularly for the fertilizer, that nobody could do that fertilizer prices were good for 20 days, and that would be the extent of it. And the fertilizer prices that I'm being quoted from this year versus last year are literally double the price on fertilizer. Ag chem prices have increased slightly, and they're not as dramatic as the fertilizer prices. But availability of certain items has been limited, so it's created potentially problems depending on the situation that you're trying to address.
Mm-hmm. So I didn't realize that. So you went from annual contract pricing with your fertilizer to the prices are good for only 20 days.
Yeah, 20 days is the most that they'll guarantee currently, because the price fluctuation, the increases in pricing is happening so quickly that the distributors of the fertilizer, they don't feel comfortable locking in prices beyond that date, because the prices are changing on their end that quickly.
Mm. So what happened? I mean, what is your harvest cycle then? Like when you plant your blueberries, how long until you're able to actually sell those blueberries?
Yeah. So in Florida, we're blessed with a lot of good growing degree days throughout the year. So we can put a bush in the ground and grow it off and harvest a small amount of fruit off of it the first year. Now, it's an extremely small amount of fruit. Those bushes won't be fully productive until they're 3 or 4 years old. So that would be what we consider full productivity in Florida, is a 4-year-old bush. And our harvest is once a year, typically starting sometime in mid-March and ending sometime in mid-May, early to mid-May. And that would vary. This is Central Florida I'm talking about. South Florida could be a little bit earlier, end a little earlier. North Florida could be a little later, end a little later. Georgia even later. I'll start with a later finish. But that's the window that we typically occupy.
So do you need some of these this crop protection products? Do you need those outside of those start and finish dates? Is that a year-round expense, ongoing expense for farms like H&A Farms?
Yeah, that's a year-round. It's kind of funny because a lot of people ask what I do for a living, and then they ask the question, well, what do you do when the harvest is over? And we always laugh at that as farmers, because you're never, it's almost kind of like house projects. You always have something you could be doing on the farm level, from fixing irrigation to we use pine bark as a growing media, putting out pine bark, to fertilizing the plants, to protecting them from pest pressures that we get. We're subtropical here, so we get a lot of pest pressure. And so you're always doing something. Our slowest period of time would actually be November. And that's about the only time of the year that we can kind of catch our breath.
Right. So how long have you been dealing with this situation where you don't, like, your contract pricing, that ability to forecast expenses and, budget and kind of control your own operational economy, so to say? How long have you been dealing with this pricing vulnerabilities for the crop protection?
Well, I usually do the bid that I was talking about in the fall, because again, that's my slow period. So that's when I kind of take care of that business. This year's the first year that I've run into this situation. I would say it's a fairly recent occurrence when talking to the distributors. And of course, you hear it in other industries as well outside of agriculture. I've got friends in construction that are telling me the same thing about building materials. But it's a little unsettling because it makes it very difficult. I often tell people growing a crop is a lot like having a child. Once you have the child, you have to feed it and you have to clothe it. Once you put a farm in the ground, you have to feed it, you have to take care of it. It doesn't really matter what the price of fertilizer is at that point. It really doesn't matter what your costs are. You're not going to just not take care of your responsibilities. So it can be a very stressful situation.
Yeah, I'd say so. And then so my point of view is growers haven't received the proper returns for a long time. I mean, I don't know if Ryan Lockman's going to agree with me on this sentiment or not, but I wholeheartedly think that our growers have needed higher returns or larger profit margins for really since I started the Produce Moms. Ryan Atwood, I'd love to hear more from you as it relates to, do you agree with me? Like, is the grower getting the return that the grower deserves, especially given all the rising costs of production?
I'm biased, obviously, but if I separated myself, I used to be an extension agent before I was a grower. So I worked with growers throughout my career, and I've seen the struggles that growers face. It's a very difficult business to be in. It's extremely capital intensive. So you put a lot of money at risk, and there are a lot of risks in the money that you put up. In terms of the labor that we talked about, can be very difficult to secure labor. The pest and disease pressure can be very difficult to control sometimes. And then you have marketing situations that you, as a grower, you have no control over what's going on with the marketplace. But the one that really will get you is Mother Nature, and you've got really no control over that. So I once told a friend of mine that I'm not a gambling person. I don't go to Vegas. I don't gamble. And they laughed and they said, "You're the biggest gambler I know because you're a farmer." And when you think about it that way, it's so true. It really is so true. There have been a number of farms going out of production in Florida, and blueberry production particularly. They tend to be the smaller grower because they don't have the economies of scale necessary to survive, because the margins are getting narrower. And so your statement, I would agree with. The margins are getting slimmer, and it's making growers. If you're not a good grower, you're being forced out of business. If you're a good grower, your margin's narrowing, which makes it less attractive for people to reinvest into more acreage.
Sure. Makes sense. Well, Ryan, thank you very much, Ryan. And Ryan Lockman, I want to bring you on now because you have, Ryan Atwood is in all of your grower stakeholders at North Bay. I mean, they're really the heart and soul of the operation at North Bay Produce. Without their risk taking, without their commitment to growing that crop, where's North Bay Produce? I mean, where are all of us? Food security is the ultimate national security. When you work in ag, it's the ultimate job security too. So, Ryan Lockman, please, let's share some of your insights now. Any reactions to the things that your colleague Ryan from H&A Farms shared?
Yeah, for sure. Going back to mainly grower returns, and that's obviously our biggest goal every day is to reinvest in the grower and to give them the highest return as we can, based on all the conditions that Ryan mentioned, market conditions, Mother Nature, conditions of Mother Nature. Whatever else may be happening in the world, within the global economy, everything on pricing wise is affected by those issues. Looking at today's landscape and where we're at, with the issues that we have with inflation and rising costs and increasing costs in labor, we're running into some very tough times coming ahead of us and currently. And what's happening is obviously that, just as Ryan mentioned, the costs of growing the fruit is increasing, but on a daily basis, the amount of available money that the average consumer has to go in and purchase groceries is decreasing because of the rising costs in the cost of what things are being charged at retail. So it's a very tight problem that we have, and our supply chains are compressing that much more because there's less room for there's less room for costs that used to be able to be there. So fruit is it's not just blueberries either. It's every produce item across the whole department is increasing, but at the end of the day, the overall spend available for the consumer is decreasing. So it's the hard part for us is to find out how to compress the supply chain that much more and find efficiencies within the supply chain, even with the rising costs, in order to be able to, one, give the grower a good return still, and two, be able to offer a value to the consumer. I think the consumer still wants to eat healthy and buy wisely and eat good over what the alternatives are with their money, but at the same time, I think that there are some consumers that will skip certain items if they rise above a certain cost. And that's our worst fear, is that, because of the costs that Ryan and his team incur within the fields, is that the price that they're going to have to be charging for their produce is going to make it unattractive to some people, and it's going to exclude some people from purchasing blueberries. And that's right. That's our worst cost. That's our worst fear.
Well, I think it's you always have to be thinking about what's next. And that's really a smart way to approach the situation we're in from my point of view, because you're absolutely right. I mean, the pressures that are happening on households with, when you consider what the price of gas costs and the price hikes that we've seen in proteins, thank goodness we haven't seen that kind of inflation in fresh produce, but even a small hike of price, which I think has been inevitable and will continue. I think we will continue to see a rising price of, goods at the grocery store. it certainly puts certain commodities within the grocery store or within the produce department at risk. And Ryan, you're spot on. When you think about something like a blueberry, while blueberries bite for bite give you such a great level of nutrition and all of these incredible antioxidants, and no one is thinking twice about the power of the food. It indexes as one of the more premium products if you're just going by the SRP, right?
Yeah, we've seen it, especially during the heat of COVID, when people really became more conservative. We saw some of the more specialty items, such as blueberries. And blueberries are still either, some people consider them a luxury item still, and some people consider them part of their everyday diet. We have some consumers that are buying regardless, and we have some consumers that only buy when there's a value on the shelf. Mm-hmm. And so when the heat of COVID was here back in 2020, we saw a lot of customers, one, switch to meat and potatoes, or onions and potatoes for that matter, stuff that's very, not as perishable as blueberries. But one thing we have done is we've also seen a move, a little bit of a move from fresh blueberries over to frozen blueberries that are more shelf stable and you can put in your freezer. So that has been one beneficiary of this past couple of years, is we're seeing people, put more fruit away and more food away in order to, have it in case of some unforeseen circumstance within the supply chain. So right. There have been some silver linings, such as the process market. But unfortunately, Ryan and his team and many of the growers within America are growing for the fresh market instead of the process market.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, our biggest challenge, as an industry, that we have right now is finding out how to make everyday consumer an everyday blueberry buyer, instead of having them choose between, if it's a value on that day or if it's not a value on that day. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it definitely, you're right. For some people, blueberries are quite the staple on their grocery list. And I don't think that it's an impossible, feat by any means to transition more folks to that level of consumer and blueberry lover. But Ryan, let's talk now a little bit about what's happening at point of sale. You spend a good portion of your days at North Bay are spent working hand in hand with the retailers. And are the retailers, how is the supply chain responding to the fact that, the cost of producing and growing blueberries is going up? Companies and business owners like Ryan, farmers like Ryan, their cost of operations way up. So how is that trickling down to affecting the point of sale? And right now is the current inflation that we've seen in terms of the cost of goods at retail, do you think that we're in a stable market, or do you think that we're going to continue to see costs rise, drop maybe?
Yeah, I think my personal opinion is that we're only at the beginning of the issues that we're going to be experiencing within the supply chain. Every piece of the supply chain literally is being affected by inflation, availability issues, transportation. Like I said, if you start all the way down at the plant material, at the most basic part of growing blueberries, and then take it all the way to the consumer, who's having to pay more for gas to get to the grocery store and back. There's the entire supply chain is being affected by our current conditions. Some of our main problems that we experience currently are lead times on packaging, lead times on plastic for clamshells, lead times on cardboard, cost of trucking, availability of trucking, warehouse staff, warehouse labor, being able to pick the product. I'm just being random here within the supply chain, but I only think that those issues are going to get more extreme, because it's not just the blueberry supply chain that we're talking about. Those issues are ranging across every single supply chain for every single commodity within our whole economy. So, it's going to exponentially almost get worse here. And unfortunately, the blueberry industry is, I don't want to, sound like I'm being diminishing, but it's small peanuts in compared to other industries. An example I can give right now is cardboard. I mean, with the addition of Amazon and what kind of cardboard demand they have, our availability and lead times of cardboard are probably higher than they've ever been in history. So
wow. Yeah.
as far as we're concerned, I don't see anything good happening within our supply chains from an efficiency standpoint, availability standpoint, cost standpoint, at least over the next 2 to 5 years.
Oh my gosh. Did you just say 2 to 5 years, Ryan?
I mean, I don't understand how everything.
I know.
Can go back.
I'm just like, oh my gosh. Yeah. Well,
I don't know how everything can just go back at the flip of a switch. I think,
right.
We're in a hole as an industry or as an economy, and we're going to have to dig our way out.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, it's important perspective. I mean, the truth can hurt. That kind of stopped me in my tracks when I heard you say that. But so how about the bottleneck issues that occurred at the ports? How did that affect your operations at North Bay Produce?
Well, it's very simple. I mean, whether it's crossing the border in Mexico or whether it's coming in in Philly or Los Angeles or Miami, if we expect fruit to arrive, let's just use on week 1. If if that fruit is delayed and doesn't arrive till week 2, number one, the quality of the fruit is not going to be as good because it's a week older than it should be. But it also disrupts all of the plans that we have with our retailers as far as when that fruit is to be sold. So if we have fruit on promotion with Meyer for week number 1 and the fruit doesn't arrive until week number 2, again, 1, the fruit's a week older, so it's not as good. And 2, we just missed that promotion that we were expecting. From a domestic standpoint, we have a little more leeway with that because the farms are on our own domestic soil and we don't have to, rely on shipping containers to bring it in. But from an import standpoint, which is, half of the year, we are having to, rely on logistical solutions in order to make sure that our fruit gets to market in the way it should be and at the time it should be.
Right. Oh my gosh. It just sounds like it's, so how long have you been with North Bay, Ryan?
15 years.
Have you ever experienced day-to-day like havoc and chaos like what you're having right now?
No, we haven't ever. And I don't think anybody's ever experienced anything like this within anybody's lifetime currently. I mean,
right.
You think back to World War II and some of the sacrifices within our economy and supply chains that had to be made. But currently, I don't think I've ever seen or heard of anything that's even close to what we're going through right now. Yeah,
I agree. Well, that's why we're doing this series and letting people tell their stories on the podcast so that consumers can understand. So, I mean, what do you want consumers to know? What do you want shoppers and produce moms everywhere to know about this?
Well, I think, the biggest key is knowledge and understanding and, just for everybody to understand what the actual challenges are that Ryan and his teams and his fellow farmers around the country are experiencing with the increased cost and the increased cost of providing a good product. I mean, just like Ryan said, he can't just cut back on inputs. He can't cut back on fertilizer or pine bark for the base of the plants, because then he's going to be offering a subpar product to the consumer, and then they're not going to pay for it because they're not
right.
going to want it.
Right.
So, I think knowledge and understanding is huge. Information is huge, which is, I'm glad we're doing this podcast. But, at the end of the day, the average consumer probably has no idea what Ryan has to do in order to put a good quality product on the shelves.
Right.
So I think information, I think knowledge, and I think, some sort of learning, to the average consumer is going to help them, understand what they're purchasing when they may be, having to pay a little bit more for their blueberries than they're used to.
Yeah. Wow. Well, so important. And Ryan Atwood, I'd like to bring you on now to talk a little bit about how, what you want consumers to know. One thing that I can tell you from my point of view at the Produce Moms is, from a consumer point of view, we got to do our part to empower the farming economy, empower the local farming economy as you can, domestic farmers and grown in the USA produce is really important right now, but it's also extremely important that you remember, as it relates to fresh produce, our harvest cycle follows the sun. And so there are certain times a year where if you want blueberries, you're going to be getting them, from Mexico or South America. And, there's a company like North Bay behind all of that access here in the US. So that's something I want people to know, though. And that sentiment of seeking out and empowering American farmers is more important, frankly. It's important always, but from my point of view, when you get into sectors of ag where they don't have to follow the sun, like you do with specialty crops, I'm thinking of meat and dairy specifically, make sure that you're buying products that are from the United States. I think that's really important for our local farming economy. But Ryan Atwood, I'd like to bring you on with any closing remarks that you have, things that you want consumers and the household level stage of the supply chain, to know.
Yeah, I appreciate what you just said, because this is a big talking point for myself. I'm not against bringing in foreign fruit or produce during the season that we can't produce it in our own country, which happens, right? The wintertime, particularly, we're not producing it. They're producing it in South America. Let's bring it in. That's great, because that just provides blueberries, particularly, that I'm interested in, for everyone, for my family in December and January, February. But, one thing I will say is I think food security for our nation is an underappreciated talking point in most circles. And I think anyone who's involved in agriculture in the United States knows that the United States agricultural system is a little bit under attack, a little bit under pressure. And part of that stems from the wage rates in these other countries. And most people don't realize, but like in Mexico, for instance, their average wages are $12 per day. Right. Well, my employees make more than that per hour.
Right.
So, we're at a huge disadvantage on our labor costs. And so the margin that if you sell, let's say, a Mexican blueberry versus a Florida blueberry at the same time of year, because we do overlap, the margin that they have over me is much greater because they have much lower labor costs. So that's just something to keep in mind, I think, as consumers. And I think you nailed it when you said, I think if you can buy U.S. grown produce, it's very important because it's a food security issue for our country.
Yeah. And I can tell you, I have, the more knowledgeable I come about this industry, which most of that knowledge has been earned right here on this podcast, speaking to thought leaders like yourself, and, your colleague, Ryan Lockman, who's with us today. But, speaking to all these different stakeholders in our global supply chain, that has really brought me to the realization that food security is the ultimate national security. So if you are, if you really like the fact that you can walk into a grocery store and pretty much get whatever you want, whenever you want, and pay, a fair price for it, you better do everything you can to make sure that you are sourcing USA farmed product. And that most definitely begins in the produce department, which is where, the majority of grocery stores start your grocery experience. You walk right into that store and you're greeted by the produce department. But it certainly applies to all the fresh product that's found throughout the perimeter. And I'm seeing it a lot in the meat counter. I'm like, why do I live in Indiana? Like, we're one of the top pork producing states in the country. Why am I seeing bacon from Australia at Costco? I don't buy it. I will not buy products that don't empower our local food economy. And you know what? At the Produce Moms, we define local as USA grown. And I know, local is not defined by Farm Bill. You can, states define it in different ways, and the climate dictates how we define local. But I do encourage everyone who's a follower and participatory in the community that we've built here at the Produce Moms to embrace that sentiment of I'm doing my part of being a good steward to the local farming economy when I buy USA grown or raised product. It's so important. Okay, guys. Well, with that, we do need to get to closing remarks here. Ryan Lockman, anything you'd like to say? Any closing remarks for our show today?
Okay, just to kind of follow up on your last conversation regarding, the foreign fruit or foreign product, regardless in the stores. One part of the supply chain that we're not thinking of either, and is the retailers part of the supply chain, and they're increasing costs of everything as well. And not that I'm defending the fact that there is foreign fruit on our shelves during the domestic time, but at the same time, it is important to understand that their costs are increasing too, which is leading to an even higher ring at the retail level, which is, in some cases making it tougher for some consumers to purchase blueberries. So what I'm saying is across the whole supply chain, there's increasing costs, which at the end of the day are leading to increasing retail prices for everything. So it's just, I wanted to kind of follow up on that. Piece of information.
It's great sentiments, great insight. It's exactly what this little series that we're doing is all about. So thank you so much for sharing that, Ryan. Ryan Atwood, I'd like to invite you back on for your closing remarks, your final goodbyes to our audience. And then Ryan Lockman, we'll throw the mic to you for the final thoughts and the closing of the show. But Ryan Atwood, please, any closing remarks that you have?
I'd just like to thank all the produce moms out there for supporting American-grown produce. I love what I do for a living. I feel very fortunate to be a farmer. I work a lot of hours, but I love it. And I just thank you for supporting us.
Thank you so much, Ryan. And hey, go Gators, right? But with that, Ryan Lockman, you get the closing remarks for today's show. So please sign us off. For anyone that would like to learn more about North Bay, you can find North Bay Produce online. They've got a great website, tons of wonderful recipes and information about all the products that they help bring to the grocery store with 365-day availability. And like I said, we've been proud partners with the North Bay brand for many years at the Produce Moms. But Ryan Lockman, please, closing remarks and sign us off from today's show.
Well, again, Lori and Ryan, thank you very much for taking the time today. Obviously, both are important relationships to North Bay. But I want to make sure that everybody understands that, we couldn't do what we do. Obviously, the Produce Mom couldn't do what she does and what they do. And obviously, the retailers wouldn't have anything for the consumers if it wasn't for our growers. So we have to make sure to take care of our growers. We have to understand the challenges. And there are going to be challenges, both, seen and unforeseen. And we have to do the best we can to support them because, that fruit, that food, that meat, whatever it may be, is not put on the shelf by chance and just because. There's a lot of work behind it. And we have to make sure to support them and take care of them in everything they do.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Produce Moms Podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a featured guest, just send an email to lori@theproducemoms.com. We know there is a produce mom in you because there's a produce mom in all of us. Join our community on Facebook and all social platforms. Help us change the way America eats. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.